Everybody, and welcome to today's session in our series of Companies for Remote. Just to let you know, Grow Remote is a volunteer organisation. We're a social enterprise and we make remote work local. We're on a mission to enable us to work, live and participate locally, and we do that by making remote work both visible and accessible. We're the only group to bring together any of the information that you need and make it easy and freely accessible to everybody, so that remote becomes mainstream and we have employment that's distributed across the country, and then everything is put to rights. So as part of that, we have this company series to help inform companies as they cope with COVID and hopefully maybe implement remote work longer term. Just for housekeeping, there is a Q&A box down the bottom. If you can post your questions in there as we go, Jennifer will kindly take them at the end. Somebody is raising a hand there. I don't know, do you want to ask a question or speak? But we'll, you put down the hand again. Testing our features, I love it. Jennifer, just to say, Grow Remote is a volunteer organisation, but we never take the time for granted. So thank you for donating an hour of your time in the middle of the day to the community to help free up that information and make remote work more accessible. It's incredibly powerful for everybody, and we massively appreciate it. So I'm going to pass it over to you, and you can tell us about what an organisational psychologist does.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for having me here today. You have had a really impressive lineup of panelists, so I'm feeling the pressure a little bit. So hopefully I will I'll do okay. Just going to share my slides with you guys just to kick off. If that's okay. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. So as Tracy said, I'm an organisational psychologist, and well, some of you may ask, indeed Tracy just asked me earlier on, what is an organisational psychologist? So basically the simplest way to describe it is that I'm motivated by finding ways to not make work suck, to do as much as I can to try and look at the various aspects of work and the ways in which we can make it better. I'm really interested in people, what motivates people, our differences, what makes us tick, and I guess trying to facilitate as much as we can people to live the best versions of their lives. Can you start to see a thread as to how I got to the area of remote working? So living the best versions of our lives, not making work suck, and understanding individual differences very naturally led me to the space of remote working. I've been kind of working remotely myself for the last 5 years, and I love it now, but it hasn't always been plain sailing. When I started working remotely first, I thought it was going to be great. And about 3 months into working remotely, I sat down with my boss and I told her that I thought I was going to quit. I had no energy, I was demotivated, wasn't enjoying my work, and even though I was doing what was on paper my dream job, it wasn't fulfilling me. So luckily my boss was also an organisational psychologist, so we can be a handy lot every now and then, and she was an expert in individual differences, and she suggested that maybe it wasn't the work that was demotivating me, but that I was struggling with the lack of interaction and social engagement. And it was a light bulb moment for me. I am on the extroverted side of the fence quite firmly. None of this ambivert slack for me. I am definitely an extrovert. I loved the flexibility of remote working, but at the time I didn't understand myself well enough to make it work. So since I've started taking runs in the middle of the day, meeting friends virtually or in person for coffee or for lunch, during work or after work, and eventually I've kind of opened my own co-working space in Killarney, the Box, and I got involved with groups like Grow Remote, and it was a game changer. And now I can't speak highly enough about remote work. I train organizations in remote working, I consult and coach, and I continue to learn in the area of remote working myself. But for me, I guess the fundamentals of remote work still come back to kind of, and the success of remote work come back to that kind of self-understanding. So understanding yourself, appreciating differences in others, I guess, and then applying that empathy with that knowledge that you have both to yourself and to other people. So I suppose at the root of what I'm talking about is this idea kind of self-awareness, in essence, kind of knowing your strengths, understanding your own individual characteristics, behaviors, feelings. As Socrates famously said, know thyself. And self-knowledge is it's fairly infinite because we're always evolving and we're always changing. So it can be good practice when we're working remotely in general to put practices in place to develop our self-awareness. And to do that, I suppose some of the things that very simply can be done are kind of, creating time, device-free time, just to connect into ourselves. How are we feeling? What's going on for us? This idea of mindfulness, and particularly at a time now where where people are quite stressed and anxious. Kind of paying attention to moods as they evolve over the day, and picking things up. I use a simple kind of mood map that sits on my desk, and I'll just check in with it during the day, see how I'm feeling, so that I avoid taking maybe negative emotions from one meeting into the other. And then also to reflect, so to reflect on how things went, how the day went, what went well, what didn't go well, in a meeting or a presentation, what went well, what didn't, how can we develop and grow and increase our self-awareness around those things. Looking for feedback from peers, from colleagues, especially as we're starting to get used to remote working, using things like personality assessments, DISC, MBTI, any of those, and then things like coaching as well can really help in kind of developing our own self-awareness. I suppose today what I wanted to look at, and personality is a really broad topic, and so is individual differences, but I wanted to look at maybe 3 areas that I think are significant in terms of remote working, and also that I think are significant now. So obviously being really aware of the current environment, and I guess the challenge that it's presenting for a lot of people. So I hope that some of what I say around these 3 areas will help us both in managing our current stresses, and also then in managing remote work in general. So what I'm going to do, we're going to look at energy first, but I'm going to stop talking for a minute, and I'm going to ask you guys to engage with me on Mentimeter. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Mentimeter. So I'm going to ask you to go to menti.com if you can on your phones, or on your desktops, but it's handy on the phone. So just menti.com, and then you'll be asked for a code 829738. Get you into the Menti board. Okay. So again, that code stays at the top of the screen there. You should all be able to see it, 829738. Tracy, just let me know if there's any issues with that. And I'm asking people to kind of feed in, what gives you energy. So just a couple of words that explain what gives you energy. So in general, what kind of things give you energy day to day? Yep, positive attitudes, exercise, momentum at work, other people, yeah, listening to music, yeah, taking action, space, running, being outside, humor, yeah, yoga, meditation, good food, podcasts, sunshine, yeah, great results, collaboration, learning something new. Okay. So lots of really, lots of things here that are giving us energy. And I suppose what the point I wanted to make with this is that oftentimes what gives us energy is quite an individual thing. And I suppose the key to it is understanding what gives us energy, and then really managing that and planning that into our day. Sometimes I think it's more about, when we're working remotely, it's about managing our energy as much as it is about managing our time. And to do that, we have to know what's draining us and what gives us energy, and how we manage that balance of both. So that brings me to my next question. And my next question is, and again, you'll just be seeing a refresh on your Mentimeter. What drains your energy? So again, just a couple of words. What drains your energy? And again, this can be a process that we kind of start reflecting on in general, but right now, yeah, bad attitudes, mess, feeling restricted, people, repetition, yeah, toxic environments, yeah, negativity, bad attitudes, unnecessary meetings. We can all relate to that at the moment. Okay, so again, what we're seeing is kind of different individual things that drain people's energy. Interesting how sometimes it can be easier to think of the things that give you energy and harder to think of the things that drain energy. And as a practice, it can be really good to start reflecting, daily. I know that when I, in the past, particularly when I started working remotely, it was really about trying to note what drained my energy, and making a practice at the end of the day of noting the things that drain my energy and things that gave me energy. And once we have that knowledge, then we can build those things into our day, and we can manage the things that if we know we're going to have a lot of unnecessary meetings, or a lot of engagements, then we know we need to balance that with things that give us energy, like yoga or meditation or whatever it is for you that works. And again, the things that drain our energy will also be things that can be individual to us too. So just as a practice, it can be interesting to reflect on those things. Okay, so I'm going to bring us just back into the slides again for a second. From a personality perspective, I just wanted to talk about energy in terms of extroversion, introversion. And this might be something that a lot of you are very familiar with. It's often something that kind of gets misunderstood when I hear people talking about it. Sometimes people think extroversion is just people who are really outgoing and introversion is people that are really quiet. This is a kind of a major misconception, I guess, around the idea of extroversion, introversion. The way I describe extroversion, introversion is like a battery. So those with an extroverted preference will be recharged by kind of engaging with the external environment, about engaging with other people, or engaging with the external in general. So if we look at this battery here, this robot has a little battery on his chest, and he's got the E underneath him. This is the extroverted robot. And when that robot is engaging with the external and with other people, his battery is increasing. Okay. On the right hand side, we have the introverted robot, and this guy has a battery on his chest too. And when he is getting time to kind of reflect and be on his own, his battery is recharging. Okay, so it's not that our introverted robot doesn't like engaging with other people. In fact, some of the best kind of networkers and influencers I know are introverts. It's just that they need that time to recharge. Just like those with an extroverted preference need to recharge by being with the external. And that becomes really important when we're working remotely. And I think that, thinking about the current challenges and the current situations people are in now, we can see how many people who maybe are on the extroverted preference side can be really struggling with maybe the dip in energy they might be experiencing with the lack of social interaction or engagement with the office. And in general, when people transition, people who are of an extroverted preference transition into a remote working environment, this can be a challenge for them. So again, it's just about thinking about how we manage that, so how do we build in that engagement with the external into our day? How do we build in walks or runs, virtual informal chats with our teammates or our friends? Using video where possible can be really important. I know a friend of mine at the start of this, she sent me a bag of coffee and she set up a standing coffee date, knowing that this was going to be something that was going to be difficult for her. And again, it's just that self-knowledge and how we can use that then to manage our day. Equally, if people with extroverted preferences, arranging whiteboarding sessions with their team can be really useful, because oftentimes people with extroverted preference, they'll get energy from thinking things out loud. So they'll think as they talk. So creating that space where they can have that kind of synergy and collaboration can be very energizing for people with an extroverted preference. They like to process externally. So again, having the space to do that can be really important. There's some great apps, and some that have kind of emerged over the last few weeks or come to my attention a bit more. The likes of FocusMate, Cafecito. So again, places where we can go, where we can talk to or engage with other people, and we can use those throughout our day to kind of keep our energy maintained. So again, what we're trying to do is become aware of it and plan for it. Notice what's giving you energy and what's not giving you energy. For those with an introverted preference, some people can say, oh, this is the dream scenario, they're working from home, this must be fantastic. But actually, in reality, I think for a lot of people, it's very difficult. There's a lot of communications now. There's kind of been this period of kind of hyper communication at the start of COVID, from the start of COVID, a lot of video communications. And people are also now working in homes that maybe weren't designed to work from, maybe busy homes with children or without proper space to kind of to reflect, to recharge, which will be really important for those with an introverted preference. So when we're managing that as introverts, how can we consider that? So again, I think it's about building in that time for focused reflection, kind of that thinking time into our day, block it out. I know even I would block out, a couple of hours every day that's focused time. And I communicate this then to my team. So they know that I won't communicate with them between the hours of 10 and 12 because that's my focused time. So there's no point in creating these times unless we kind of communicate them to other people as well, especially when we're working remotely. I think building in the practice of things like, agendas and efficient meetings can be really important as well for both extroverts and introverts, but particularly for introverts, that we pre-circulate updates, we pre-circulate agendas in advance of meetings. We're not putting people on the spot, and we're not, engaging in really long meetings that can be quite draining. So again, kind of giving people a chance to reflect on topics in advance can be really useful as well when we're looking at that introverted preference. And obviously then kind of following up with what has come out of the meeting, establishing that clarity and what's to be actioned and by whom, being, really good practice in remote work in general anyway. I think for those with the introverted preference as well, it's trying to find that the quiet space to work from in the home as well. Creating those boundaries that you're all familiar with as being really important when we're working remotely. So how do we create kind of those physical boundaries or work from a fixed place that triggers us to kind of psychologically triggers us into working when we sit there or kind of open our laptop in that particular spot. And then I think it's really important to communicate those to other people as well. So communicating those boundaries to other people can be really important. I suppose one of the risks with introverts in general when we're working remotely is that we don't communicate what we need and when we need it. So again, just really trying to be aware of that as well, depending on our preference. Often we hear people say, actually, at the moment, I've got my work self and my home self, and now both are being asked to coexist in the same space. And that can be a really big adjustment for ourselves, but also kind of for those around us as well. Kids experiencing, fun daddy normally, and now they also have stress daddy in the house. How do we manage this? And I think this is where kind of our boundaries become really important, that we create these boundaries and that we communicate them. I was talking to a friend the other day, and what she started doing, because she was really struggling with this, is she found a crown belonging to one of her kids that lights up, so when she's working now, she puts on this crown, so all her kids know that she's working, and when she's got really focused work to do, she turns on the light on the crown, so they know they really don't disturb her in those situations. So again, I suppose it's just about trying to find ways to create those boundaries, but really then to communicate them to other people as well, so that they can respect them for us. Okay. So I suppose just to wrap up in terms of kind of that energy piece and what I would take away from it is really kind of reflecting on what gives us energy and what drains our energy, reflecting on our preferences, and then managing that by kind of building it into our day and into our week when we're working remotely. And building and then kind of communicating as we need to with other people as well around this. Okay, so any questions on that actually before I move on to the next section, before I move on from energy? Tracy, anything? Or Okay.
Jennifer, we might wait until the end, and if people want to post in the question and answer box, they can. I do actually have a question, and I wrote it down, but maybe you can take it now.
Yeah.
Very little to do with remote work, but I suppose as part of identifying how we take in energy. Can you be extroverted if you get energy from other people, but only certain other people? And sometimes you can be drained. So it's like maybe your point of power, but it can go two ways, kind of a thing, and you can get very drained and very energized. Is that an extrovert?
Again, I mean, yeah, I think so. I can't say whether that's an extrovert or an introvert, but I think that absolutely we can be drained by other people. And I think then it's about reflecting on who's draining us and why they're draining us. What is it about the interaction that's draining us? What is it about that person that's draining us? And the people who are energizing us, what is it about them that's energizing us again?
We could quickly go into a counseling session here.
But it's a really good question. Absolutely, we can be drained by people even as extroverts.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
But I'll let you continue.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, so the next area that I wanted to look at was this idea of time. And I guess this was something that I've been delivering workshops over the last couple of weeks around remote working, and it's something that comes up repeatedly for people. It's something that I know I struggled with quite a bit when I started working remotely. And I was really familiar with this idea of time management and time planning and organizing. But what I didn't really realize was that that's just one element, really, that there's two other significant elements that are worth considering in the conversation around time and how we manage it. Um, the first of these is temporal awareness. So this kind of idea of time awareness, how well we understand how long things take to do. So some people have very high temporal awareness. They're very aware of how long it'll take them to do things, and they can manage their time accordingly. And some people have lower temporal awareness. So example, I have a friend, and she would be very optimistic about how much she can do. And so she'll pack her day with the things she thinks she can do. But at the end of the day, she's always frustrated because she's never able to complete those things. And her temporal awareness is low. Because of her optimism. But again, in developing this, what we need to do is learn how long things take to do. And I know that when I was trying to do this and to try and kind of to overcome the frustration that I would feel at the end of the day when I hadn't got things done, was use apps like Timely or Harvest or Time Doctor. So again, what I'm trying to do is when I start a project or start a report or start prep, I'll click on one of the apps, you put in what I'm doing, and at the end of the week, then if I do that consistently, it'll give me an idea of how long things have taken me to do. And once I understand how long it takes me to do X, Y, and Z, then I'm in a position to properly manage and plan my time. But if I haven't got an accurate awareness of how long those things take, I'm always going to be disappointed with my time management. One of the other things that I found really useful in developing my temporal awareness was feedback from my team. So, if I had a project that was coming up and I had, kind of allocated time for various parts of the project, I would use somebody else who maybe I knew had very good temporal awareness to give me feedback on how well I had allocated my time. So somebody might say, actually you need to give longer for this part of the project, or have you thought about this? And in doing that, then I was also raising my temporal awareness. We're all familiar with kind of the idea of kind of time management and kind of planning and managing our time. But we also have individual differences around this. So some of us are really good at time management, some of us less. Some of us really like to have a clear plan. We like to make a decision and put a very clear series of steps in place. And for other people, then they're much more pressure prompted. So for them, they like to be fluid. They like to adapt as situations evolve and emerge. And I think these can be kind of significant challenges when we're working on a remote team if we don't understand that we're coming at things in these different ways. So for people who like a plan and like to make a decision, it's really about making sure that we share that plan and those steps with other people, and that we also build in time to assess and reflect on our plans. Was this the most accurate or most efficient way to do this? Is there other things that I could be doing, or do I need to adapt and change? For those of us who kind of like to be more fluid and adapt as we go along, we really need to kind of convey that to other people. And again, it's about communicating what we're doing when we're doing it, and understanding that other people will need more information than we may be comfortable kind of thinking about or giving it at a particular time point. And again, lots of tools we can use to support this. Most remote teams will use good shared calendars, and obviously that can be really important in the communication piece that I talk about. I suppose for some people we're seeing this really clearly over the last week or two, so those who kind of maybe were really delighted and kind of maybe reassured by the plan we got from government last week in terms of how things are going to evolve and change. And for some people that was really important. For other people, really, it's about evolving and seeing how the situation kind of evolves and adapting accordingly with that. I suppose the last part of this idea around time then is this kind of area of kind of time monitoring. And I suppose this is about kind of self-leadership and self-monitoring. And again, something that's really highly correlated, I guess, with successful remote working. So, how do we keep ourselves on track? Best laid plans and all that. So how do I now know kind of how long things take to do, and I've planned my time accordingly, but how do I make sure I don't get, distracted by emails or by an article that I come across on the internet? So really some people are better at this than other people as well. But there's ways that we can develop our own kind of self-leadership and our own self-management. I know for me, it's very simple things like, setting an alarm, 5 or 10 minutes before a call, and 5 minutes before the call is due to end, so that I can really become aware of trying to stick to plans. Habit stacking. So if I've got something that I do every day, can I build other habits onto that? So, before lunch, can I make a habit of, checking in on a series of reports, or post lunch, can I make sure I do a call around with the team? Or so again, what you're trying to do is kind of build on existing habits. Using rewards is always useful as well. And then things like the Pomodoro techniques. I don't know if any of you have come across that. 25 minutes on, maybe 10 minutes off. And again, what we're doing is trying to train our brain. A bit like Pavlov's dogs, if anybody's familiar with that. We're just trying to trigger ourselves into working for set periods of time. So I suppose kind of the takeaways on time management are really kind of, where are we strong on these three different areas? And again, taking into consideration individual differences, and that we'll each have areas that we're better on and maybe areas that we're weaker on. Where could we kind of focus our attention, and where could we develop in each of these areas? And also, I suppose, just to say, like, when we're learning and when we're developing new skills, there's also a cost, and there's a cost to self-management in terms of energy. So when we're learning and developing, that can be energy draining. So what we're aiming for is kind of progress, not perfection, and kind of building our confidence and efficacy in these things as we go along. I think confidence is an interesting one to talk about, especially now as lots of people are adapting to kind of new technologies and learning new things. We can sometimes be our own worst enemies around this. We expect ourselves to be able to do things very quickly and straight away, and we can have this kind of negative self-talk that can go on now. I'm never going to figure out this new platform. It's too difficult. I'm never going to get the hang of it. And that girl on the webinar said I'm not supposed to be, giving negative self-talk to myself. Oh God, I shouldn't be doing that either. And we spiral into this kind of negative conversation with ourselves. So I suppose what's really important here is, when we're growing and developing our skills, when we're adapting to remote work, or at any period when we're learning new skills, is that we kind of maybe notice negative self-talk, but that we kind of catch ourselves with it, and we don't chastise ourselves for negative self-talk. We just kind of notice it, be kind to ourselves, and then maybe kind of let it dissipate as well. And then I suppose also to think about the progress we've all made over the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks. I feel like I could go into sales or tech support for Zoom, in terms of what I've learned about various different platforms over the last few weeks. So kind of record where you're doing well as well. And even as a daily practice, what have you done well today, or what have you done well at the end of the week? And this can be really important, particularly now when we're all under kind of increased stress, just to kind of build our optimism and our resilience, and kind of help us to kind of reduce the stress that we might be feeling. Okay. So that brings me on to kind of the next area that I want to look at, is stress. Before I get into that, Tracy, is there anything there in terms of time that you want to ask questions about? Or
no, we're perfect. Please do, Tanya, I'm not going to add you in, but please do post in the question and answer box, and we will take those as we go. That temporal awareness, I've actually never even considered it, but it's a very good point, Jennifer, around understanding that on top of everything else. So really useful. Continue on.
Great. Okay, super. Thank you. Okay, so kind of the last area that I wanted to talk about in terms of individual difference was stress. And we're going to go back to Mentimeter here, if that's okay, because I'm conscious now that I've been talking for too long. So I want to ask a few questions around stress, if that's okay. And the first question I want to ask is kind of, how does stress manifest for you? Okay, so how do you know when you're stressed? Physically, emotionally, psychologically? Where do you feel stress in your body? How do you know when you're stressed? So how does it manifest for you? Yeah, you become angry? Yeah. Fatigue, tiredness? Yeah, absolutely. Unproductive? Anxious? Yeah. Back and shoulder pain, sore stomach, headache. Yeah. Lack of energy, snappy. Yeah, absolutely. People are tired. And again, I suppose that the point here, and the reason I kind of do this, is stress and how it manifests can be quite individual as well. So for some people, it'll be stomach ache. For some people, it could be a headache. For other people, they just might have no energy. For other people, they can kind of feel very very anxious. People can get unproductive. People can feel tired. They can struggle to sleep. But again, it can be quite individual. And I guess the important thing is to understand kind of, how it manifests for you, because the earlier we kind of identify stress, the better we're able to kind of to manage it and control the effects that it might have. So that brings me to my next question. Great, thanks, guys. And my next question is kind of, how do other people experience you when you're stressed? And again, think about that for a minute, if you like. When you've been stressed in the past, how might other people have experienced you? Moody, yeah. Disengaged, short, snappy, less approachable. Some people hide it very well, great. Indifferent, withdrawn, not as bubbly, distant, yeah. Indecisive, yeah. Cynical, yeah. Okay. And again, I suppose what's really interesting about this, and especially when we think about it kind of from a remote work perspective, is that, obviously we don't want people experiencing us like this, and especially when we're working remotely. So, for example, when I'm in the office and maybe Tracy comes in and she's stressed, I can usually see visibly that Tracy is stressed. So, I can apply intuition and empathy in terms of if Tracy is snappy with me or if she's disengaged, I can recognize that maybe there's stress at play. And kind of, if we think about the fact that 90% of what we say is not in the words that we use, we can see when we translate that then to remote, and I get an email from Tracy when I'm sitting at home that's snappy or short-tempered, or when I don't have the context around the stress that Tracy is feeling, I've no way of knowing that she's stressed, and I respond or I don't, but either way it can affect our relationship going forward, and our relationship can be damaged as a result. So really kind of understanding that how people may experience it when we're stressed, and really taking responsibility for that. So I think there's two things from for example, this example. So Tracy, for example, in this case, has responsibility when working remotely to monitor this. So when we're working remotely, we really have a requirement to build our own self-awareness around this and to take ownership for this, and to really I guess identify, just as we did in the last exercise, as early as we can when we're feeling stressed, so that we don't pass that stress on to other people and maybe damage relationships in ways that we don't want to. Secondly, I think when we're receiving communications, when we're working remotely, and now we all are kind of virtually, we need to kind of foster and build our empathy for other people. We need to kind of assume good intent and give people the benefit of the doubt, especially now. I think it's a really good practice in remote work in general, but it's really, really important now that we don't assume that Tracy is being, snappy or irritable just for the sake of it, that maybe there's something else at play. I think that can be really important in kind of developing and maintaining our relationships when we're working remotely. So one more question I want to ask you is, how do you manage stress? So when you're stressed, how do you manage it? So what things help you to manage your stress when you're feeling stressed? Yoga, yep. Going for a walk, breathing exercises, talking to others, logical deductions, eating, getting outside, taking a break. Perspective, yeah. Gratitude diaries, good teammates, talking to the dog, yeah. Baking a cake. So I think kind of, when we look at the steps here, so we've looked at kind of how do I identify stress? So we've looked at kind of that idea of building our own emotional self-awareness about when we're stressed, attuning ourselves to our stress and when it manifests for us. We've thought about kind of what happens if we don't, if we let that emotional contagion of our stress pass from us on to other people. We all know the idea of, someone comes home from work at the end of the day and they're stressed, and within half an hour, everybody in the house is stressed or in a bad mood. So that we're taking responsibility for not being that emotional contagion. We've understood what we're like when we're stressed. And now we've kind of talked about how do we manage that stress. Okay, so given the information that we have, knowing when we're stressed, now we need to kind of figure out how we can manage it and how we can kind of build that into our day as well. I think this is really important. I think there's a huge individual differences element to this as well. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of sick of the Instagram kind of well-being experts telling me all the things I need to be doing now that we're in isolation. But I think there's a real individual differences piece to this, how we experience stress as individual, how stress manifests for us as individual, and how we manage stress as individual. I think that the instinct can be to look out for the answers when we're stressed. So what'll help us, but oftentimes it's about kind of looking in. We all know the basics of kind of exercise, eat well, wash our hands right now. But what works for you, and what in the past has worked for you? And you're your own best expert on this. So really it's about kind of reflecting on that expertise that you have, and then using it. Knowing what works for you and kind of building that resilience toolkit around that. And kind of then building that into your day. So, knowing that if you're going to have a lot of stress in your day, you need to build in time to manage stress, having a go-to routine if you encounter stress in your day. So starting point being recognizing the stress, and then it's about having your toolkit ready to manage that stress. And I suppose, particularly at the moment, recognizing that we're all kind of in an increased state of stress. COVID and this last couple of weeks has really kind of triggered all of our kind of fight or flight instincts. And really we kind of need to give ourselves kind of a bit of leeway around that. When we have kind of that fight or flight instinct triggered, we kind of have that increased production of cortisol, which can make us hyper focused on the threat. So it can find us kind of spending hours reading news reports or getting very caught up on certain things that we wouldn't normally get caught up in. And when that occurs for long periods of time, it can lead to kind of chronic stress, and it reduces our production of kind of oxytocin, which is our kind of happy relationship building hormone. And actually it can kind of jeopardize our relationships remotely, because when we're not producing that oxytocin and when we're overproducing cortisol, we tend to have an increased propensity to mistrust other people, to be more irritable, and we can see how that can maybe damage our relationships, particularly if we're working remotely. So really the importance now of recognizing that stress, managing it, and having empathy kind of both for ourselves and for other people as well. So thanks for your engagement on that. Tracy, I'm nearly there. Just to recap on the kind of the stress side of things. What's really important is kind of recognizing when you're stressed. So building that emotional self-awareness. That's really important in remote working or in any job, but I think particularly in remote working. Knowing what works for you, so having that resilience toolkit there, and then showing empathy both kind of to yourself and to others, and particularly now. So recognizing the differences that exist, and showing empathy within that. So again, I'm conscious that we're about 40 minutes, and the areas that we kind of looked at very briefly were kind of the areas of energy, time, and stress. Tracy, any questions in or around those areas?
Loads. Sorry, just to dive briefly on your point around assume good intent. That is something that we have in our culture in Grow Remote, and it's game changing. So when you hear something, the first thing say is, if it's whatever it is, assume good intent, assume good intent, assume good intent, and then you're able to wrap whatever is coming at you within that, and it's a really powerful way to do it. I do have some questions, but also we have some questions here, which is a good one. So and this is actually something that came up on other courses before, sessions before, particularly with Shane Evans, who's CEO of Ireland's largest homegrown remote company. Somebody walks into the office, you can see they're stressed, you'll interact with them differently and you'll adjust. So if you are stressed, should you mention that you're feeling stressed to the people that you're communicating with?
Can do.
Yeah.
And again, I think it talks to the importance of video as well, doesn't it? Because it's much easier to tell someone when you see them face to face that I'm feeling stressed. It can be difficult to put it in an email, but equally worthwhile doing. What we're trying to do is exactly that: catch the emotion, understand it, and then manage it or communicate it. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think when you get momentum in a remote team, for us in Grow Remote, it becomes the norm. So I would say to Rose, context for my answer here, I am stressed. And we get used to that because it goes both ways as well. So we're able to communicate that. So the next question.
One thing on that, I had a great example with the team I was working with the other day. They'd started referencing Weebles. Do you remember Weebles when we were small? They were like the little things that would wobble but always return to an equilibrium. They were like little people, kind of oval shaped. And they kind of used it to represent what was going on now. So they were all having like weebly moments. So they would wobble. They would always come back to center, but they would have that wobble. And I thought it was a nice way of understanding resilience, even, that we can have wobbly moments right now, but we'll all kind of return to a center. And they use it as a language then, so having a weebly day or having a weebly moment. And I just thought it was a nice way of creating a language around the stress people were feeling now. So yeah.
Absolutely. And so on that note, if somebody, how do you help somebody realize they're stressed? I suppose your boss kind of did it for you, but it helped you realize something else. So how do you help people realize that they might be stressed? I'm just thinking about, when you're stressed and somebody says, calm down, you're like, oh my God, worst thing you could say. So obviously maybe that's not the answer, but what is then?
Yeah, like I think it comes back to like, the really good communication skills of like listening, and really intentionally listening to people and giving them our attention and asking good questions and checking in with them and reflecting back what they're saying, but giving them a space. I think that's really important now. And I'm sure you've talked about communication loads, and we're going back to communications 101 when we're working remotely, and it's trying to hone like really good communication skills, and that's both in what we say and in how we listen. I think that listening is a huge part of it, giving people space around that.
Yeah, and showing you care. I guess people are more inclined to share information with you. And I have found it useful to have a check-in and check-out at the beginning and end of meetings to gauge emotional temperature. That's a good idea. And I wonder how you do that. Is that like a polling, or does everybody say I'm good, I'm bad, I'm whatever? I'd love to know kind of practically what that looks like. Jennifer, I was just thinking, so there's a range of people, organizations that are transitioning remote. And I suppose if you think about organizations, say with a couple of hundred people, but maybe with 10,000 people, how do you scale this across the organization so that everybody is equipped with what they need? Because what I'm hearing is that it's an awful lot of it's empowerment of other people, and other people need to take that up. And as you say, kind of spend some time with themselves to understand how they make it work. So like I was thinking, is there like a pack that you send out to every employee, which is like, covers the basic, or do you train up managers, or how do you do this at scale when there's lots of people and you're asking them all to take control of their own piece of this?
One thing that I've seen done, and I think it's really great, is this idea of kind of a user manual, that you ask people when they're working remotely to spend time considering how they work best. So, they'll create and I've seen teams do this really well, where they each create a kind of a PowerPoint around, this is how I communicate, this is the time when I like to do focus work, this is how I like to plan, and they create that and share it with their team, and it allows both that person to reflect on how they operate and also for them to communicate it with other people, and then to build up that understanding within teams and organizations of the differences that can exist.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I've seen that where people, I remember the first time I saw a deck and they said, I prefer to communicate, on Slack, or I don't like if you just call me out of the blue, or whatever. And then you're able to also know another organization who had personality tests done, and then everybody got a mug. Obviously this might only work in person, but so there was a red mug and an orange mug and whatever, so you could tell when somebody had their mug what kind of personality they were and how you might interact with one another, which was really interesting.
And just on that as well, I mean, I think a lot of people now who maybe have been suddenly transitioned to remote, they may have done these personality assessments in the past, go back and revisit them, and see what information is in those that may be able to help you now in the transition. So
yeah, I think this is amazing. We did a 360 coaching in Grow Remote where everybody had to review me, and I had a particular challenge, and I was explaining it to the coach, and they said, this is the personality type, and I bet you this is what she said. And I was like, wow, that's exactly what happened there. And it was amazing that she could just tell by how two personalities work together, exactly what was said. So they are really powerful. ANSI has set a baseline for people to expect kind of check-ins at the start and at the end of the meeting, and it's done verbally. So I think that's brilliant. Like if you can work that in and then iterate that as you go, and that's really valuable.
I heard one more just good example on that, Tracy,
yeah.
just the other day. If we have time, I'll just share it. It was just an organization that were using Slack, and they had set up a channel on Slack, and whoever was first on in the morning would post a kind of a GIF or kind of a word or a picture that would represent their mood that day. And as everyone came in, they would post something up. So it was a way of like temperature checking how everyone is during the day or at the start of the day. It was a nice way to kind of get a gauge for what the feeling was in the team.
And it's funny, I noticed in your Mentimeter, people had humor as an energy, promoter. So my word's not working today, but so that's really interesting that you could use it in GIF form. We're like, tired or whatever it is. That'd be a good positive way to start the day. Might be veering into the more psychology side here again, but any tips on positive emotional contagion? Contagion? Yes. Any tips?
I'm not sure if I understand that question perfectly right, Tanya, but just to, I suppose, how we spread positive emotion maybe, or is that the question?
Tanya, I can, if anybody raises a hand, I can unmute you. Your camera can't be shown. So there you go, Tanya, fair play to you. You're the first person. I'm going to unmute you now. So just your mic, so you will be able to talk and ask that question.
Hey, Tanya.
Hey, Tanya.
Hi. First of all, thank you. That is absolutely brilliant. Would love to have watched this about six weeks ago. Very, very grateful, because I think it'll be cocooning in Dingle for a while. But just thinking about, you're talking about the emotional contagion and the impact of stress and passing it on. Mm-hmm. Thinking about positive emotional contagion, because I think we can see the negative emotional contagion around us. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's just thinking of examples around, some people naturally have it, mm-hmm. where they're the force of their personality, their optimism, their humor can be infectious, and that's wonderful. And just thinking then about where it can be more consciously, triggered, mm-hmm. grown, mm-hmm. Examples where it's sort of being consciously manufactured sounds manipulative, and that's not how I mean it. Yeah. It's with genuine good intent to think about where there's examples of good practice that you've seen in organizations or in supporters within sports or whatever it may be, like Mexican waves or something, that we can learn from other areas or other arenas.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I mean, the principle is the same as a negative emotional contagion. You know, if someone comes into a room or they come home from work, the example I gave earlier, and they're in great form, that can be just as equally contagious. And I think your point about the role and the importance of that now is really, really good. How we can kind of foster that for ourselves, like simple things like gratitude journals and things like that are great for kind of generating that positive emotion. And I know as a practice, I would do it now, especially when things are difficult. Make it a practice that I would do every day. In terms of kind of how teams are doing that, I've heard some great examples of how people are creating really good informal networks. I was talking to someone yesterday, and they've set up a kitchen on Slack that people can go into at any point during the day, because they figured the best fun and the most interesting conversations happened in the kitchen. So again, they were trying to create a space that was positive, that people could go to, not just at their lunchtime or outside of work, at any point during the day when they just wanted a bit of a lift. Great stories of people with WhatsApp groups that are just about sharing kind of funny things around what's going on now and generating that humor in one place. So I guess all those things, people are being amazingly innovative and creative. Tracy, you've probably seen a few things as well around this that are really...
I actually think that's a really interesting question. Hello, Tanya. I didn't know it was you. Great to have you here. But I suppose when your team is distributed, the negative energy can actually stay alone in a box. So that's good. That somebody won't be walking into the office going, "Oh, this is crap." But equally, somebody walks into the office and goes, "Oh, lads, today's going to be a great day," etc. You lose that. So how do you get it to infect the distributed team, you know? And maybe, I don't know, actually, that's a question that maybe we can look into more case studies about, Tanya, because it's a really good question. Maybe it's as simple as like, you know, red room, blue room, and red room is where positive stuff happens. So if you do need a little bit of an injection, that's where you go, or something like that. It's a bit like the kitchen. So I don't have a straight answer actually for that, but it's something that I would love to look into a little bit more.
Great question, Tanya.
You want to remove you again? If you want to ask a question over Speak Talk, you can do so. John says a short online pulse survey can help gauge sentiment in large organizations too. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's an organization called Frankly, and you can do it on your phone. So like daily, you can say, you know, here's what's up, I'm not feeling the culture, or whatever else it is. And it's a very powerful way to do that. Kira says, hello Kira, by the way, hope you're well. You mentioned some apps such as Timely. Would you have any others that are good to use and share with others for time management, stress management, etc.?
So Timely, Harvest, Time Doctor, they all do that same process of kind of recording time. The Pomodoro technique is really simple to look up as well online. The likes of shared calendars, again, kind of we all have access to those. So they're the kind of the ones around time probably that I would use or have used the most. Maybe anybody else have in chat things that they use around kind of, or apps that they're using around time management?
Yeah, I know
well-being.
Scraping Hub use an app for that kind of time management piece, but I didn't actually get the name. It might be worth doing, because like that, the time can run away from you when you're working remotely. So it's good too for anybody to have, as long as I suppose it's not used as a, sometimes we're hearing stories of like a Zoom camera always on, where they're just checking to see if you're in the room and stuff like that. So I guess it's how it's wrapped up in your culture as well, the use of those tools.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if there is no more questions, we might sign off in just a couple of minutes. But Jennifer, just the last question. You're obviously a couple of months into, and you're probably one of the first person to do this kind of training in remote as a skill, which we're trying to get out there, that remote skill in Ireland in the last while. Is there any kind of, so when we think about remote and challenges that we would have had to get it in, it's a lot of challenges around mindset and things like that. So is there any kind of nuggets of wisdom that you've gained from that in terms of the challenges the companies are having or managers are having in implementing remote, and how you might help them to get around it?
Okay, so that's kind of a big question, but yeah. Okay, so I suppose one of the biggest observations that I've made in the last few weeks, so kind of doing training with different organizations, is that piece around kind of efficacy, that confidence that people have, organizations as a whole or teams as a whole have felt from having been able to do this. You know, so we've made a huge adaptation in terms of how we work and the way we work. And there's a huge confidence boost now in people's ability to do it. You know, people describing it like, you know, ripping the bandage off. You know, we've been talking about remote for ages and now we've done it. And I suppose for me, the most important thing now is that we really make a point of building on what's working well and learning as much as we can from what is working, getting really good feedback from people, and going through that journey with people together, you know, looking for what's working well for you, what's not working well. I talked to an organization the other day, and one thing they're doing at the end of the week now with their team is just saying, you know, what one thing would have made it easier for you to do your job this week? You know, and so again, it's just like, it's a slow progress. It's not perfection. It's about building on what's working. And I think that's the thing that I've learned the most, and really harnessing the confidence that people are feeling now in their ability to adapt and to change.
Yeah, I think that's, I think that the transition as it's happening today has never happened before. So an open mind and feedback surely is, you know, exactly how we do it. And if we're all aiming for remote, we might eventually get there. I've no doubt that we will. Jennifer, thanks again for giving us so much of your time, for preparing for today, for coming on today, and just for freeing up that information so that it's easier for people to implement what they're doing. As Tanya said, I'm sure lots of people would be hoping that they would be wishing that they had heard from you a couple of weeks ago, but they can, obviously they can Rebecca, hello, it's great to see you here, and thank you for the thank you. I appreciate it. That has given me energy. Sorry, but they can contact you anyway, and I'm sure, and you will, thank you, Debbie, but you will help them out. I've no doubt that Jennifer is on
Absolutely. And Tracy, as much, just like yourself as well, as much as we can do now to help and support people, in transitioning to remote,
in everybody's interest.
Reach out if we can do anything in any way through Tracy or through LinkedIn. You'll be able to find me. So thanks very much, everyone. And thank you, Tracy, for all your hard work at the moment.
Thank you. See you later. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, guys. Thanks.